bioinformatics micromodules, suffix array, and Burrows-Wheeler transform. In this module, we introduce two additional data structures for performing text search, which are commonly used in short-read alignment. In the previous modules, we have studied the suffix tree data structure. Storing the tree requires recording the links between parent and child nodes. If the occurrence algorithm is used, we also need to store the suffix links during the construction. These overheads lead to a large constant factor of the space required by a suffix tree. One related data structure that has a lower overhead is the suffix array, which is simply an array of suffix positions when the suffixes are sorted in lexicographic order and nothing else. Let's see an example. Suppose we have a sequence S, which is $. All the suffixes and their starting positions in S are listed in this table. Now we sort the table according to the suffixes lexicographically, which means that when we compare two sequences, their order is determined by the first position that they differ. After this sorting, the position numbers shown in the second column of this table is the suffix array with exactly n entries when S has a length of n. It is clear that the suffix array requires a smaller number of bytes per position than the suffix tree, even though both have the same space complexity of order n log n. Now let's see how we can use the suffix array to perform text search. We are only going to introduce a simple but inefficient method here. Suppose we want to search for AT from our index sequence S. The suffix array is shown here. Please remember that the actual suffixes are not part of the suffix array, and they are shown here just for reference. The search is based on an idea we introduced in the previous module, that if a query is contained in S, it must be a prefix of a suffix of S. In our example, to search for AT, we want to know whether it is the beginning of one of the suffixes. To know whether this is the case, we first go to the middle entry of the suffix array, which is the entry indicated by the blue arrow. To see whether the suffix represented by this entry starts with AT, we check the character of S at the specified position. Since the fifth position of S is a C, which is not an A, this suffix does not start with AT. Now, if there is actually a suffix that starts with AT, its entry must be in the first half of the array, since all the suffixes are sorted and this middle entry is for a suffix that starts with C. Therefore, we repeat the previous procedure and go to the middle entry of the first half of the suffix array. This time we check S9 and it is indeed an A, and so we check the next position S10 and find that it is a G instead of the T that we are searching for. Therefore, using the same logic as before, if there is really a suffix that starts with AT, it must be after this entry, but before the middle entry of the whole table. In other words, now we need to search the second half of this first half of the array. Just like before, we go to the middle entry of that range, and this time we find that S2 is an A and S3 is a T, and therefore we conclude that AT is contained in S, and one occurrence of it is at position 2 of S. What if we want to find out all occurrence positions of AT in S? One way is to do a linear scan upward, starting from the entry that we just visited, and then another linear scan downward. For example, if we start with the array entry for suffix position 2, the one above it is for suffix position 9, and that suffix starts with AG, which is not AT, and we stop that direction of linear scan. Then we also do a linear scan downward and find that the next suffix, which is the one that starts at position 6, also has AT at the beginning, but the one after that at position 5 does not. Therefore, combining the results of the two linear scans, we conclude that there are exactly two occurrences of AT in S at positions 2 and 6, respectively. Alternatively, if we carefully record which array entries are still within the search range and consistently use either the ceiling or the floor function when dividing odd numbers by 2, it is possible for us to find out all array entries that represent suffixes starting with the query using two binary searches without the need for any linear scans. We will not give the details here. How much time does it take to find one occurrence of the query? With n entries in the suffix array, binary search requires the checking of all the log n entries in the worst case. And each time, all characters in the query need to be checked one by one in the worst case, making the overall time order m log n for a query of length m and an index sequence of length n. This is lower than the order m required by suffix trie or suffix tree. It is possible to improve the time complexity of text search using suffix array, but we will omit the details here because we want to focus on the Burrows-Wheeler transform that will be introduced in a moment. Before we talk about Burrows-Wheeler transform, let's briefly talk about how a suffix array can be constructed. If we really list out all the suffixes and sort them, we will need a lot of time and space to obtain the suffix array. Instead, we can make use of a suffix tree to obtain a suffix array efficiently. For example, here on the left, we see the suffix tree for tag $, and on the right, we see its suffix array. Due to the lexicographic order, the sorted suffixes correspond to the leaf nodes according to a pre-order traversal of the suffix tree. For example, during a pre-order traversal of the suffix tree, the first leaf node that will be visited is the one highlighted in green, which corresponds to the suffix that starts at position 11, and this position is exactly the first entry in the suffix array. Similarly, the second leaf node to be visited is this one highlighted in green, and it corresponds to the suffix that starts at position 4, since before reaching this leaf node, we need to first go through an internal node that represents a single character, and therefore the starting position of this suffix is 5 minus 1, which is 4. Accordingly, the second entry in the suffix array is also 4. In general, since a suffix tree can be constructed in linear time, and the tree traversal also takes linear time, the suffix array can be constructed in linear time as well. As discussed before, both the suffix tree and the suffix array require order n log n space for a sequence of length n, and the log n part is due to the storage of position numbers, which range from 1 to n. Now we introduce a new data structure produced by the Burrows-Wheeler transform, or BWT in short, which essentially shuffles the characters in the sequence in a certain way. Since at each position we only need to store a character, the space required for each position depends on the size of the alphabet, which is represented by the symbol sigma here. For example, if we only need to store the 4 possible nucleotides of DNA sequences, A, C, G, and T, the size of the alphabet is 4, and therefore each character can be stored using 2 bits, which is a constant independent of the length of the sequence to be indexed. As a result, the output of BWT requires only order n space instead of order n log n space. Now we explain BWT, which was proposed by Michael Burrows and David Wheeler in 1994. Given the sequence S, conceptually what BWT does is to put all rotations of S into a matrix sort all the rows of the matrix according to the lexicographic order of the rotations, and then take the last column of the matrix as output, which we will call B. Exactly how these steps are carried out will become apparent after seeing an illustration in a moment. Before that, please notice that in this and the coming modules related to BWT, whenever we use the term conceptual, it means something that describes the procedure in a way relatively easy to understand, but can be computationally inefficient. We will also discuss methods that can achieve the same goal much more efficiently. Here is an illustration of BWT. As usual, we have sequence S, which is $. We first list out all rotations of S. Each rotation is basically cutting out a subsequence from the beginning of S and appending it to the end. For a sequence with n characters, including the sequence itself, there are exactly n rotations. Next, we sort the rotations lexicographically. And then we take the last column as the output of BWT, which in our case is this sequence B, GTTT-CAAA-T$A. At this point, you may not understand why we want to perform this transform. But as we will explain in the coming modules, the BWT output can actually facilitate efficient text search. We will learn how to do that step by step. One important observation we should make is the correspondence between the sorted rotation matrix and the suffix array, that the rotations and the suffixes have the same sort order. For example, after sorting, the first rotation is $TATACATTAG. If we ignore everything after the $ symbol, it becomes $, which is exactly the suffix represented by the first entry of the suffix array. Similarly, after sorting, the second rotation is ACATTAG$TAT. If we ignore everything after the $ symbol, it becomes ACATTAG$, which is the suffix represented by the second entry of the suffix array. This correspondence between the sorted rotations and the sorted suffixes is due to the $ symbol, which ensures that when deciding the order of two sequences, by the time when we reach a position that either of the two sequences has a $, the order of them must be determined, since we cannot have $ at the same position of both sequences. In other words, all characters after the $ symbol in each sequence is never involved during the sorting of the rotations, and therefore the sort order of the rotations is exactly the same as the sort order of the suffixes. We should notice that if the $ symbol is not appended to the end of the sequence, the sort orders of the rotations and the suffixes may not be the same. You can verify it by yourself using the sequence CAA. Before we end this module, let's discuss how the relationship between the sorted rotation matrix and the suffix array can help us produce the output of BWT efficiently. Suppose again we have S equals $, and we want to produce the BWT of it without using the time and space consuming procedure. The way to do it is actually very simple if we have the suffix array. For the first character of B, by definition, it is the character in the last column of the first row of the sorted rotation matrix. We know that the character after it in S must be the one in the first column of the first row of the matrix, since the first row is a rotation of S. According to the suffix array, this character is at position 11 of S. Therefore, the first character of B must be the character one position before it in S, which is S10, or G. Similarly, for the second character of B, we first go to the second entry of the suffix array, which is position 4. The character we need is at the previous position of it in S, which means S3 or T. All the remaining characters of B can be obtained in this way, with the only tricky case being B10. In this case, we need to extract the character before the first character of S, and we do that by extracting the last character of S, by viewing S as a circular sequence that has the last character followed by the first character. In the next module, we will discuss some properties of BWT that will finally lead to an efficient text search algorithm.